I've got a couple of things to address. I wanted to talk about this notion what's going around that work is this almost bad thing. Like, why have we got as a mass consciousness this idea that work is bad? Like, where did that come from? This boring thing that we should escape, and rather than working, us be on a beach, be chilling, be relaxing, doing anything but work. I wanted to address that and talk about my experiences with working a 9 to 5, since I have done so for the past 3 years, and I still do every day. My job's about as monotonous as monotony gets. Is that even a word? I work at Amazon, so essentially for 10 hours a day, all I'm doing is exactly the same thing, which would just be storing items into their inventory. And that's all I do all day, every day. And I want to talk about how I was able to find like a higher sense of purpose from that, which is kind of weird. It's kind of delusional, right? Because in reality, it's not so much a higher thing. But before I talk about that, I wanted to talk about my beginning. So starting out, I didn't like working at all. I didn't like working whatsoever. I was 20 years old when I started working, and I hated it. Waking up to go to work was tough. It's like it was a battle. It was one battle to get to work, and then another battle began when I got to work. So getting to work was hard, but then dealing with work was hard. So it was just hard every day, and it was suffering, and it sucked for a good 2 years. I'm not gonna lie. My newfound realizations aren't that long come by. Yeah, it sucks starting out. This place is weird. I think one thing, I hope the lighting's good as well. I think one thing that helped was realizing that I don't have any credentials. So Amazon pretty much is, I want to say, what I deserve. I'm not saying that in like a way where I'm putting myself down, but Amazon is what I deserve. My credentials on paper, which is what matters when it comes to the job market, my credentials on paper are of somebody who doesn't have any, I dropped out of college at school. In the UK, we call it college, right? So I dropped out of college, and then I didn't go to uni, because obviously I didn't even get to college. So I finished secondary school, which would be high school, and then for me, that was it. So me realizing this, I understood that Amazon was about as good as I'm going to get without going back to the drawing board, so to speak, and getting some credentials. So I was kind of okay. That didn't really change much in itself, but that was a little bit of a realization of mine. So moving on to the meat of the subject, what it was that actually brought it home for me. And back when this happened, and back when I had this realization, I didn't actually realize that's what had happened. What had happened is I read a book recently, and it allowed me to actually look back at that time in my life and think, oh yeah, that's what I did. That's the transition, what happened. So I'm going to be able to articulate it here a lot better than how I had it when I actually had the realization myself. So essentially, I got this from a book called Grit, Grit. And what she talks about in that book is this idea of having a higher sense of purpose. So there's three people, like engineers or whatever you want to call it, and they're all working in the same place. And an interviewer asked them what they were doing. Number one says, I'm working my job. I'm working, I'm working, whatever, right? It's a feasible answer. Number two says, I'm building a church. And number three says, I'm building a house of God, or I'm building the house of God, whatever you want to call it. And then how she differentiates these three answers is, number one sees it as a job, number two sees it as a career, and number three sees it as a calling. He sees it as his calling. And I feel like I don't even need to really explain further what these differences would mean in terms of their approach to their work. But relating this back to Amazon and my job, I went from, seeing my work as having no meaning, seeing it as being stupid and a waste of time. I went from that for a good 2 years, like a disconnect from, a higher purpose sense of self. There's a lot of potholes over there. That's why the clips are skipping. I went from not really thinking that my work has any meaning to, you know what, I actually do have a higher sense of purpose from this. And I think what caused me to have that transition was that I realized I'm not going to be at Amazon for too long. You know what I mean? Like I'm not going to be there for too long. So there's no reason to think it's this forever thing, because it isn't. So there was that realization that I'm really not going to be there for that long. The plan was to get this money and use it to start my business and do my other things. So it's like that in itself gave it meaning, you know what I mean? Because it was like part of a blueprint, part of a strategy. There was that. And then like from a more abstract sense, it's like my job does have some kind of meaning. Like removing myself from it, like a higher sense, I'm helping people get their orders. I'm helping people, I'm helping solve problems every day in a sense. Like without me, people aren't going to be able to get their orders. And I understand that I'd be very quickly replaced just like that. I'm essentially a number in this behemoth entity. But, me brainwashing myself, being delusional, I was like, wait a minute. Like, no, there's purpose in this. You know what I'm saying? There's purpose in this. I'm able to drive some sort of higher meaning that I'm like saving the world in a sense. Like if somebody doesn't get their shaving gel on time or whatever else. These two things is what allowed me to switch from this doesn't actually have any meaning, this is kind of dumb, whatever else, to okay, this actually has some meaning and me being here is important and it helps. And sticking on the idea of this is another book that I was thinking about that kind of relates to this as well, which would be Dr. Viktor Frankl with his book Man's Search for Meaning. Like I feel most people know about that book. Perhaps you haven't read it, and essentially what the book talks about is this idea of logotherapy, which is basically what I've been talking about this whole video, where it's this whole idea of finding meaning inside of, suffering, we could say. And in his example, obviously, he was in a concentration camp with Nazis controlling him and putting him through suffering. Hold on, I need to focus. Logotherapy is this idea of finding meaning inside of suffering. And in his case, Dr. Viktor Frankl, he was in a concentration camp, which is like the epitome of suffering. And he talks about how he was still able to find meaning inside of that and find purpose and find, in a sense, pleasure. Like he'd able to like reminisce on, memories with his wife and different stuff like that. So he was able to find meaning inside of that like really high suffering, which is crazy. I'm reading that and I'm like, wow, if he's able to do that, me working my job, I'm like, I can't even complain. So I guess some of these things kind of make me a little bit delusional, but they've worked for me. Maybe they'll work for you if you try them out.